My name is Janora Claiborne, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the backbone of my family. People often talk about sacrifice in broad strokes, like it's a noble word to throw around when life gets hard. But for me, sacrifice wasn't an occasional choice. It became the air I breathed. I was widowed in my late 40s, and from that day on, I made a silent vow. My only son, Malric, would never go without, no matter what it cost me. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. I worked 2 jobs at times, sometimes 3 when I picked up cleaning shifts on weekends. By day, I sat behind a desk in an office downtown, inputting data with the kind of speed only desperation could produce. By night, I stood behind the register at a grocery store, my feet aching, my hands dry from handling money and plastic bags. On Sundays, I ironed clothes for neighbors to scrape together a little extra. Every dollar I earned, every ounce of energy I spent, circled back to one purpose: Malric's future. I saved aggressively, cutting corners where I could. There were years when I patched up my shoes instead of buying new ones, when I stretched a pot of beans and rice for a week, so I wouldn't have to buy more groceries. I learned how to live with less so Malric could live with more. I clipped coupons, fought for discounts, and swallowed my pride more times than I can count. Pride didn't feed a boy or pay tuition, discipline did. When Malric grew older, I poured everything into his education. I didn't have much to give in terms of legacy or inheritance, but I knew I could give him a launching pad. Every parent hopes their child will reach higher than they ever could, and I was determined to make that true for him. When he married Taylor, I didn't slow down. If anything, I pushed harder. Taylor was ambitious, and I admired that. She worked in pharmaceuticals, chasing promotions and opportunities that promised stability. But stability doesn't come from ambition alone. Stability comes from a safety net, and I became that net for them both. When the children came, I babysat without complaint. I folded myself into their routine so they could chase their careers without worrying about sitters or daycare costs. When bills ran tight, I slipped money into their hands discreetly. And when the biggest opportunity of their lives came, a chance to buy a sprawling home in a gated Atlanta suburb, I gave them the one thing no bank would have handed over easily: $85,000. That wasn't a loan. That wasn't a gift. That was every late night, every penny saved, every sacrifice condensed into one figure. It was the kind of money people spend a lifetime wishing for, and I poured it directly into their future because I believed it would anchor them for years to come. Without me, their foundation would have cracked long ago. With me, they rose higher than I could have imagined. But here's the truth I need you to hear. Being a backbone doesn't make you visible. People don't thank the spine for holding the body up. They only notice it when it breaks. And for all the years I carried them, for all the nights I lay awake balancing bills and prayers, what I received in return wasn't gratitude. It was entitlement. My sacrifices became expected, my contributions invisible. The very people I had raised and supported saw me less as a mother and more as a resource, a lifeline they believed would never run dry. I carried that reality quietly. I smiled through it, because what else was I supposed to do? But if you're listening to me now, I want you to really picture it. A woman who gave everything she had, standing in the shadows of the life she built for others. That was me, Janora Claiborne, the foundation, the one holding it all together, even when no one thought to ask if I was tired or if I had anything left for myself. Before I continue, let me ask you something because I want this to feel real, like we're sitting together and you're hearing it straight from me. What time are you watching this right now? And where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments because I want to know who's here with me as I tell this story. When I think about the life Maurik and Taylor built, it wasn't just theirs. It was mine, too, because without me, that house, that lifestyle, that sense of ease never would have existed. I wasn't standing on the front porch smiling in family photos, but I was the invisible cornerstone, the one who made sure the walls didn't crumble. The $85,000 I contributed to their down payment didn't just buy a home. It bought them credibility with the bank, leverage in a competitive neighborhood, and the security to say yes to a house far beyond what they could have qualified for on their own. Every brick of that gated Atlanta suburb mansion was cemented with my sacrifice. And once they moved in, my role only deepened. I became more than a grandmother. I became free childcare, a financial buffer, and the reliable voice that always said yes when they asked for help. Whenever daycare costs threatened to pinch their pockets, I stepped in. When Maurik wanted to take Taylor on an anniversary trip to the Bahamas, I was the one who kept the children overnight, no questions asked. When her work demanded late nights at the office, I made sure there was dinner on the table and homework done by bedtime. My fingerprints were everywhere in that house, even if no one cared to acknowledge it. And I don't say that with bitterness. Not then. Anyway, at the time, I thought that was what love looked like. I thought sacrifice was another word for devotion. But slowly, I began to see the difference between giving freely and being expected to give without end. Vacations became routine for them. Trips to Miami, New York, even Paris once, all funded by the stability I provided. Maurik never had to think twice about leaving work because he knew his children would be cared for. Taylor never hesitated to take on new projects or travel for pharmaceutical conferences because she knew I'd pick up the slack at home. Their lives expanded while mine contracted into a single role, the safety net. At first, I told myself it was temporary. I thought, once they find their footing, they'll stop leaning so heavily on me. But the more I gave, the more they expected. When the children outgrew diapers, I thought my responsibilities would shrink. Instead, they grew. School pickups, extracurricular activities, late-night fevers, it was always me. My phone was their lifeline, and the phrase, "Can you help, Mom?" became less a question and more a command. Entitlement has a way of sneaking in quietly. It doesn't announce itself with bold demands at first. It seeps in through patterns. It shows up when gratitude fades and expectation takes its place. Slowly, their thank yous grew less frequent. Their tone shifted from "we appreciate you" to "you'll handle it." And without realizing it, I had allowed myself to become invisible in their story, the unseen scaffolding holding up the image of a perfect young family. I remember one moment that stays with me. Taylor posted a picture online from their trip to Cabo, her in a wide-brimmed hat, Maurik beside her, both smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. The caption read, "Work hard, play hard, blessed beyond measure." Hundreds of likes and comments poured in, and I sat there, scrolling through it, thinking about how those smiles were only possible because I had worked even harder and no one knew. Their blessings weren't free. They were borrowed from me. Looking back, it wasn't the trips or the house itself that stung the most. It was the way they began to live as if I owed them this life, as if my role wasn't optional but permanent, And with each passing year, that entitlement deepened until it became the fabric of our family dynamic. The house might have had their names on the deed, but it was built on my back. And while they thrived, I began to feel the weight pressing harder against me, silently wondering how long a spine can hold when no one thinks to ask if it's breaking. I used to tell myself that exhaustion was just part of getting older. After all, when you've carried as much weight as I have, 2 jobs, raising a son alone, holding up a whole household that wasn't even mine anymore, your body is bound to protest. But what I began to feel wasn't just ordinary fatigue. It was something heavier, something deeper. It started with the shortness of breath. Walking up the stairs to my apartment left me winded in a way that frightened me. Carrying groceries felt like a marathon. My chest would tighten, and I'd have to stop pressing my hand against the wall until the room stopped spinning. Then came the swelling in my ankles, the pounding in my chest that woke me at night, and the dull, persistent ache that no amount of rest seemed to cure. I knew something was wrong. I couldn't ignore it anymore. So I went to the doctor, alone, and listened as he spoke words that sank like stones in my stomach, a failing heart valve. He explained the condition, the risks, the surgery I would need. His tone was careful, measured, but all I could hear was the possibility of death sitting quietly between us. I sat there nodding, but inside, my world went silent. The truth is, I was terrified. I had spent my life being strong for everyone else, but in that moment, I felt small, fragile, and more alone than ever. I could have called Maurik. I could have reached out to Taylor. I could have asked them to sit with me, to hold my hand through the storm. But I didn't. And not because I didn't want to, but because I already knew how it would go. If I told them the truth, it would become about them. Taylor would worry about how it disrupted her career schedule, about the inconvenience of having to adjust. Maurik would look at me with that mix of pity and frustration, as if my weakness were an obstacle in his life. I had carried them for so long that the idea of becoming their burden felt unbearable. So I lied. When they asked about the procedure, I brushed it off as routine. Just a small thing, I told them, nothing to worry about. I didn't mention the long list of risks or the fact that there was no guarantee I'd make it out alive. I didn't tell them about the surgical team in Cleveland that had been recommended or the weeks of recovery I'd have to endure. I simply packed my bag, quietly booked my flight, and left. Traveling out of state alone for something so serious was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. As I sat in that airport, ticket in hand, I wondered how my life had come to this point. I had spent decades building a family, pouring every ounce of love and labor into them. And yet when my own body betrayed me, I chose silence. I chose solitude, because deep down, I knew their concern would be thin, shallow, and tangled up in their own needs. The flight to Cleveland felt endless. Every minute I replayed the doctor's words, every possibility weighing on me. Would I survive the surgery? Would I wake up in a hospital bed, unable to breathe on my own? Or worse, would I never wake up at all? There was no one beside me to squeeze my hand, no one waiting to meet me when the plane landed. Just me carrying the fear alone, the same way I had carried everything else. In the quiet of that decision, I realized something painful but true. The family I had built was never really mine to lean on. I was always the support, never the one supported. And as I boarded that plane, heart pounding, I promised myself one thing. If I lived through this, I would never go back to being invisible again. The first night in the Cleveland hospital was the longest of my life. They wheeled me into a stark white room that smelled of antiseptic and fear. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of silence pressing down on me. I had checked myself in, signed my own paperwork, and handed over forms that spelled out in black and white the possibility that I might not survive. On those forms, there were spaces for family contacts, someone to call in case things went wrong. I left them blank, not because I didn't have anyone, but because I refused to beg for the kind of support that should have been freely offered. The days that followed blurred into a haze of monitors beeping and nurses bustling in and out. The pain was relentless. My chest throbbed, my breathing felt shallow, and every injection, every test reminded me how fragile my body had become. I watched the nurses bring food trays, help other patients adjust their pillows, and even chat with visitors who came in carrying flowers and balloons. My side table stayed bare. No visitors, no cards, no one asking how I was holding up. Loneliness has a strange way of magnifying everything. The hospital bed felt colder. The nights stretched longer. When the lights dimmed in the hallways, the hum of machines became my only company. I lay awake, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat, wondering if it would carry me through the night. I tried not to think about how Maurick hadn't called, how Taylor hadn't asked for updates. I had told them it was just a minor procedure, and they were content to believe that. My suffering was out of sight, out of mind. The paperwork was endless. Consent forms, risk disclosures, instructions for who would handle things if I didn't wake up. I signed them all with trembling hands. Each signature felt like a surrender, like I was preparing the world to go on without me. No one sat across from me to reassure me I'd be fine. No one asked if I was scared. And I was scared, more than I ever admitted to anyone. But in the middle of that emptiness, one face kept showing up. Dr. Carvale. He wasn't even the lead surgeon. My case had been passed on to another team. Still, he stopped by whenever he could, sometimes just for a few minutes, sometimes longer. He'd ask how I was feeling, check the charts, make sure the nurses were attentive. He spoke to me not just as a patient, but as a person. That mattered more than I can explain. I remember one evening in particular. The pain was sharp that night, the kind that steals your breath and leaves you clutching the sheets for strength. I closed my eyes, trying to will myself through it, when I heard a soft knock. It was him. He pulled a chair beside my bed and asked gently, "How are you holding up?" No one else had asked me that. Not once. The question alone almost broke me. He didn't stay long. Doctors rarely do, but his presence was enough. It reminded me that I was still here, still seen, still worthy of kindness, even if my own family hadn't bothered to show up. I clung to that small mercy because without it, the days would have swallowed me whole. Recovery dragged. 3 weeks of fighting pain, of learning to breathe deeper, of nurses adjusting wires and tubes, as if I were nothing more than a fragile machine to keep alive. And every night, I lay there wishing I had someone to whisper to, someone to hold my hand when the fear crept in. Instead, I learned to steady myself, to stare into the darkness, and remind myself that survival was something I had to choose again and again, even when no one else was watching. Those weeks in Cleveland stripped me bare. They showed me exactly how alone I was, how little my sacrifices had been repaid in the currency of love. But they also showed me something else, that sometimes kindness comes from the least expected corners. A doctor who didn't owe me a thing made more effort than the family I had built my whole life around. That truth sat heavy on my chest, heavier than any incision, and it would stay with me long after I left that hospital. 3 weeks after my surgery, the hospital finally discharged me. My body was weaker than it had ever been, my chest stitched with reminders of what I had endured. Still, I was alive, and that counted for something. With a suitcase that felt heavier than it should have, I made my way to the Cleveland airport. Every step echoed in my mind. You made it through. You survived. Sitting in that crowded terminal, I pulled out my phone and opened the family group chat. My fingers hovered for a moment because even then, I wasn't sure whether to reach out. But a small part of me wanted to believe, wanted to test whether the years of sacrifice meant enough for them to meet me halfway. I typed, "My flight lands at 1 p.m. Can someone pick me up?" and press send. Then I waited. The minutes stretched into hours. Planes came and went. Announcements blared overhead. People reunited with hugs and laughter all around me. I sat there quietly watching strangers collapse into each other's arms while my phone stayed still on the seat beside me. No buzz, no reply, no sign that anyone cared I was coming home. Finally, the screen lit up. It was Malric. My heart leapt for a moment, but when I opened the message, the words landed like a slap. "Why don't you ever plan anything in advance, Mom?" That was it. No warmth, no relief that I had survived open-heart surgery, just annoyance, as though my recovery was an inconvenience. I stared at the message, letting the coldness of it sink in. A few minutes later, Taylor chimed in. "We're too busy today. Just call an Uber." I read it twice, then a third time, hoping I had misunderstood. Too busy? Too busy for the woman who had carried their household, watched their children, and even bought them the home they lived in? Too busy to pick up the mother who had just walked through the shadow of death and back. Around me, families embraced, suitcases rolled, children laughed as they ran into their parents' arms. My phone glowed with indifference, and that was the moment something in me shifted. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't remind them of the surgery, the weeks of pain, the loneliness I had endured in that hospital. Instead, I typed a single word. Okay? It wasn't resignation. It wasn't even sadness. It was the drawing of a line, quiet but final. They didn't know it, but that one word carried the weight of everything I had endured. It was the moment I decided I would never carry them the same way again. I sat there in that terminal with people rushing past me, my body still aching from the surgery, and I realized something I had refused to face for years. They weren't going to change. Malric and Taylor weren't going to suddenly become grateful or present or supportive. They were who they were, entitled, dismissive, blind to the sacrifices that made their life possible. But me, I could change. I could choose not to play the role they had cast me in anymore. I could stop being the invisible backbone and start being something else entirely. As I slid my phone back into my bag, my hands still trembling from weakness, my resolve settled like stone. Their indifference no longer broke me. It steeled me. That single exchange in the airport was more than rejection. It was clarity. And clarity is its own kind of power. So I sat waiting for the next announcement to board my flight home, surrounded by strangers whose joy only made my loneliness sharper. But inside me, something had begun to harden, not in bitterness, but in strength. I had carried them long enough. From this moment forward, the weight would be theirs to bear. When I finally stepped outside the airport doors, the weight of my body felt heavier than the suitcase I dragged beside me. My chest still carried the ache of stitches, and my legs trembled with every step. The plan was simple: call an Uber, ride home alone, and pretend the silence in that group chat hadn't cut as deep as it did. That's what I expected. Another solitary ending to another solitary day. But what happened next was nothing I could have imagined. A sleek black Bentley pulled up to the curb, its polished exterior catching the sunlight like a mirror. At first, I thought it couldn't possibly be for me. Cars like that belong to executives and celebrities, not a weary grandmother barely holding herself upright. But then the back door opened, and there he was. Janora, Dr. Carvale said warmly, stepping out with a steadiness that contrasted the chaos of the curbside traffic. He reached for my elbow, his touch firm but gentle. "Let's get you home. You shouldn't be standing here alone." For a moment, I couldn't even find the words. In 3 weeks of hospital beds and cold meals, I had grown used to being invisible. And here he was, the one person who had noticed me when no one else did, showing up in a way my own family had refused to. He guided me into the Bentley like I was royalty, not a woman patched together by surgeons. The leather seats felt like another world compared to the hard chairs in the terminal. As the car pulled away, I caught a glimpse of myself in the tinted window, pale, frail, but still here. And for the first time since the surgery, I felt something close to dignity. That evening, while I was settling back into my modest home, the world found out too. Dr. Carvale posted a simple photo online, me stepping into his Bentley, his hand steadying me. The caption was just as simple, but it carried weight I hadn't expected. Honored to help my friend Janora Claiborne home after her courageous cardiac surgery. A remarkable woman. The response was immediate. Comments poured in, thousands of them. Words like inspiration, strength, and warrior filled the thread. Strangers praised a woman they didn't even know, while the very people I had sacrificed everything for hadn't bothered to pick me up from the airport. The irony was sharp, and I let myself feel every bit of it. But the ripple effect didn't stop there. Within minutes of the post going up, my phone lit up, not with congratulations or warmth from Maurick and Taylor, but with panic. Missed calls, back-to-back messages, frantic texts asking why Dr. Carvale was posting about me. And then I understood. Their sudden urgency had nothing to do with my health. It had everything to do with him. Taylor had been chasing Dr. Carvale's endorsement for months. She wanted him to back her pharmaceutical campaign, to attach his reputation to her work. She had sent him email after email, each one ignored. She saw him as the missing piece to elevate her career. And now, with one photograph, she realized the connection she had been fighting for was sitting quietly with me. The woman she dismissed as a dependent, as an afterthought, was the one man Dr. Carvale had chosen to stand beside. I didn't answer their calls. Not one of them. I sat in my living room with my legs stretched out on the ottoman, the hum of the Bentley's ride still lingering in my bones, and I let their panic run its course. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one scrambling to meet their needs. They were the ones scrambling, and I had no intention of making it easy for them. That night, as the comments on Carvale's post kept climbing, I leaned back in my chair and felt something shift again. It wasn't anger this time. It was something steadier, something sharper, the awareness that I had value they could no longer control. And I knew, deep down, Taylor's ambitions had just collided with a wall she never saw coming, me. When Dr. Carvale's post went live, my phone turned into something I barely recognized. The same phone that had been silent in my hospital room, silent when I landed at the airport, suddenly buzzed with such urgency it shook the table. Calls, messages, notifications, all pouring in like a dam had broken. The first call was from Maurik, then another. By the fourth attempt, I didn't even bother glancing at the screen anymore. Seconds later, Taylor's name flashed across, followed by her texts coming in rapid fire. Why is Dr. Carvale posting about you? Call me right now. We need to talk about this. Not once did either of them ask if I was okay. Not once did they type the words, "How are you feeling, Mom?" or "Are you home safe?" Their urgency had nothing to do with the open-heart surgery I had just survived. It was about him, about the man they had been chasing for months suddenly orbiting around me. I sat there in my living room, the soft hum of the television in the background, my body still fragile, my stitches aching every time I shifted. And yet, the irony wasn't lost on me. I had begged quietly for their attention when I needed it most, and they gave me nothing. Now that they saw my name attached to influence, their phones might as well have been on fire trying to reach me. Every few minutes, a new message came in. Taylor's tone grew sharper with each one. "Mom, this is serious for my work. Do you even understand what this means? You need to pick up." Malrik's messages weren't much different. "We should talk before people start asking questions. Why didn't you tell us about him?" Tell them? As if I owed them an explanation for kindness freely given to me. As if every part of my life was theirs to claim, to shape, to twist into something that served them. The buzzing didn't stop. Hour after hour, their panic spilled through the screen. But I let it all ring out. I refused to answer. For once, I didn't let their voices dictate my next step. For once, I didn't rush to smooth things over or play the dependable mother who rescued them from their own poor planning. I sat in my chair, the phone vibrating on the table beside me, and I let the silence on my end become my answer. It felt foreign at first. Ignoring Maurik had never been easy for me. Not when he was a boy tugging at my sleeve, not when he was a man asking for money I barely had. But as I watched the calls pile up, I realized something powerful. Their need for me had shifted. This time, it wasn't about what I could give them financially or physically. It was about the value of my presence, the weight of my name tied to someone they desperately wanted. And that's when it hit me. For decades, I had measured my worth by what I provided them. Meals, babysitting, money, a home. I believed my only value existed in sacrifice. But this moment cracked that lie wide open. My worth didn't depend on Maurik or Taylor at all. It was mine independent of them, and for the first time, I felt it. As the night wore on, I silenced the phone completely. Their calls went unanswered. Their texts remained unread. I curled up beneath my blanket, exhausted but strangely lighter, knowing that in their panic, they had revealed the truth I had long suspected. They didn't want me. They wanted access. And now, that access was something I could choose to close. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel like the background of someone else's story. I felt like a woman whose worth stretched beyond being their mother, their provider, their safety net. And as their phones lit up mine with desperation, I sat in the quiet, reclaiming the power I never knew had always been mine. The first time I met Omari, he was sitting in my living room, his tall frame angled comfortably in the chair across from me. It felt surreal. I had spent years watching over a house that didn't belong to me, a house I helped pay for but never claimed. And now here I was in my own modest space, facing a man who carried himself with quiet authority. He wasn't flashy. He didn't need to be. There was a steadiness about him, the kind that told me he knew exactly how to untangle the knots people found themselves in. Dr. Carvale had brought him over. "Janora," he said, resting a hand gently on my shoulder as I shuffled to the couch. "This is Omari. He's an old friend of mine, a lawyer I trust. I thought you two should talk." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I wasn't used to people bringing me resources. For years, I was the resource. If anyone had a problem, they came to me. If something needed fixing, I was the one who found the solution. Now, here was a man offering his expertise to me, not because I begged for it, but because someone believed I deserved it. Omari leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped. His eyes studied me, not with judgment, but with patience. "So tell me," he said, his voice calm but direct, "what do you want?" The question hung in the air like it had weight. Simple words, but no one had ever asked me that before. People asked me what I could give, what I could cover, what I could carry. No one ever asked me what I wanted. At first, I hesitated. Old habits die hard, and my instinct was to brush it off, to say something small, something polite. But then I thought about the hospital nights, the blank emergency contact line, the airport silence, and the flood of phone calls that came only when my name carried value. My chest tightened, but this time not from pain, from clarity. I lifted my eyes to meet his. "I want to take back what I gave them," I said. My voice didn't shake. It was steady, as though the words had been waiting years to come out. All of it. The money, the house, the accounts. I want it back. Omari nodded slowly, as if he had expected that answer. "Everything?" he asked, making sure he heard me right. "Yes," I said firmly. For years, I poured myself into their lives. I built them a foundation they never respected. And now, I don't want them to have any more of what I worked for. Not a cent, not a stone, nothing. The room went quiet after that. Even Carvale, who had been standing quietly by the window, turned to look at me with something like admiration. It wasn't anger driving me. It wasn't revenge in the cruel sense. It was resolve, the kind of clarity that comes only after you've been stripped down to the truth. Omari leaned back in his chair, his lips pressed into a thoughtful line. "Then that's where we'll start," he said. Hearing those words gave me a strange sense of peace. For so long, I thought I was trapped in the role of giver, the one who never asked, the one who never reclaimed. But sitting there in my living room, with a lawyer ready to take my side, and a doctor who had shown me more kindness than my own blood, I felt a shift. This wasn't about punishing Maurik and Taylor. It was about rewriting the balance. I had spent decades pouring into them until I had nothing left. Now, for the first time, I was choosing myself. And it all started with one question, and my answer, clear as day. I wanted it all back. Omari moved quickly. Within days of that first meeting in my living room, The wheels were already turning. He explained things in detail, walking me through each step, and for once in my life, I didn't feel lost in paperwork or unsure of what I was signing. I felt like I was taking back control, piece by piece. The first strike was small but sharp, the credit cards. Over the years, I had allowed Maurick and Taylor access to accounts in my name. It started innocently enough, a card for emergencies, a joint line they could use for family expenses. But those emergencies had quietly expanded into shopping sprees, vacations, and conveniences I never touched for myself. Now, with one set of signatures, Omari ensured those cards were canceled. The moment the accounts closed, I imagined Taylor at a store counter, swiping her card only to be met with a cold rejection. I pictured Maurick at a gas pump, stunned when the transaction wouldn't go through. They had grown so used to my support being endless that the idea of a limit must have hit them like a wall. The next move was bigger, freezing the accounts they dipped into. Over time, they had treated my savings like a cushion, withdrawing when their own money ran tight, always with promises to pay it back that never came. Omari filed the paperwork that locked those accounts down tight. No more dipping, no more quiet withdrawals. For the first time, they were forced to stand on their own without my safety net. Then came the house, the very house I had poured $85,000 into, the place they strutted through as if it were their kingdom. Omari reminded me of something I had nearly forgotten. My name wasn't just attached to that property as a co-signer. It meant I had legal rights, rights they had chosen to overlook because they assumed I would never exercise them. But I was exercising them now. The preparation began. Notices were drafted. Paperwork was filed. Step by step, the home that had symbolized their security was slipping out of their grasp. It wasn't loud, not yet. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, measured, and precise. Just like the cuts of a surgeon, each move severed a tie that had kept me bound to their entitlement. At first, they didn't notice. Entitlement makes people blind until it's too late. But as the days passed, the ground beneath them began to shift. Their cards didn't work. Their access dried up. Bills they had ignored came knocking. The life they had lived so carelessly was starting to wobble, and they couldn't understand why. I stayed silent. I didn't explain. For years, I had given explanations for everything, why I couldn't buy myself something new, why I covered for them yet again, why I stayed up late ironing shirts for extra money instead of sleeping. This time, there were no explanations, only action. I imagined their conversations behind closed doors, the panic setting in. Taylor pacing the living room, her polished career mask slipping, as she realized the ground was moving under her feet. Maurick, frustrated, trying to piece together how their easy ride was suddenly hitting resistance. The truth was simple. The safety net they depended on had been pulled away, and it wasn't coming back. For me, the shift was just as real. Signing those papers, hearing Omari confirm that the cards were gone, the accounts secured, the house in motion, it gave me a kind of relief I hadn't felt in decades. It wasn't joy, not exactly. It was freedom. It was the sound of chains falling quietly to the floor. I didn't need to announce what I was doing. I didn't need to shout it from rooftops or demand they see my worth. The beauty of those first cuts was in their silence. Each one spoke louder than words ever could. Each one reminded me that I wasn't powerless, not anymore. And as Maurick and Taylor began to stumble, their comfort cracking piece by piece, I sat in my modest living room with a cup of tea in my hands, breathing easier than I had in years. The cuts were small, but they were enough to bleed the entitlement out of their lives. The first knock came in the early evening. I knew it was him before I even rose from my chair. Malric had a way of pounding on doors that carried both impatience and desperation, a rhythm I'd come to recognize over the years. I opened it slowly, and there he was, my son, standing on the porch with his jaw tight, his eyes darting like he was bracing for a storm. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, his voice unsteady. I stepped aside, letting him in. He paced the living room like a caged animal, rubbing his hands together before finally blurting it out. "You can't do this. The cards, the accounts, the house. That's our life, Mom. The kids need stability. We can't just lose everything overnight." There was not worry for me, not a single word about the surgery, not gratitude for the years I had given, just fear for himself, dressed up as concern for his children. I watched him, and for the first time, I didn't feel pulled to soothe or explain. I sat down calmly, folding my hands in my lap. "For years, Malric, I gave you stability. I worked until my body broke down to make sure you had what I never did. And what did you give me in return? Silence in a hospital bed, an empty airport terminal, calls only when you saw a name that could serve you." His mouth opened, but no words came. His eyes softened for a moment, but then the anger returned, sharper this time. "It's not that simple, Mom. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, the life we've built. You're tearing it apart." I shook my head slowly. "No, I'm simply stepping out from under it. What falls after that is what you built, not me." He ran his hands over his face, muttering something under his breath, but before he could say more, the front door flew open without a knock. Taylor stormed in, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. She didn't even look at me at first. Her eyes went straight to Malric, then to the room, scanning as though she expected to see someone else sitting there. "Where is he?" she demanded. "Where's Dr. Carvale?" I stayed seated, my calmness deliberate. "He's not here." She spun toward me, her face tight with fury. "You don't understand what you're doing. Do you realize how important that connection is? Do you know what his endorsement could mean for me, for us? You need to introduce me to him, Janora." Janora, not Mom, not even respect in her tone, just a demand, cold and transactional. I looked at her, squarely, unflinching. "No." She blinked, stunned for half a second, then sneered. "No? You're seriously going to block me from an opportunity like this? After everything we've done for you?" I almost laughed at the irony, but my voice stayed steady. "Everything you've done for me? Taylor, you've taken. That's all. I paid for the house you parade around in. I watched your children so you could chase your career. I covered your bills when you were drowning. And when I lay in a hospital bed fighting for my life, you couldn't be bothered to pick me up from the airport. You don't want me. You want what I can give you. And now I'm done giving." The room fell silent. Malric shifted uncomfortably, caught between his wife's glare and my words. Taylor's mouth opened, then closed again, her fury choking her voice. I rose from my chair, slow and deliberate, my body still weak, but my spirit unshakable. "Both of you need to hear me clearly. I am no longer your safety net. I am no longer your bank. And I am certainly not your connection. Whatever you thought you were entitled to ends here at this door." Malric's shoulders slumped. Taylor stood rigid, her fists clenched, but neither of them could find words strong enough to fight back. For once, the power was mine, and I didn't have to shout to prove it. I walked to the door and held it open. "You can leave now." For a moment, they hesitated, the son who had leaned on me his whole life, and the woman who saw me only as a ladder to climb higher. Then, slowly, they stepped out, their silence heavier than any argument they might have tried to make. I closed the door behind them and stood there, hand on the knob, breathing steady. It wasn't rage that carried me. It was clarity. And clarity was final. It was close to midnight when I heard the knock. At first, I thought I'd imagined it, the kind of soft tapping that could be mistaken for the wind against the shutters. But then it came again, louder this time, followed by a small voice calling out, "Grandma, it's me." I hurried to the door, my heart tightening as I opened it. There stood Sabria, my teenage granddaughter, her eyes wide and rimmed red from crying. She was still in her pajamas, a hooded sweatshirt thrown over them, and her hair was uncombed, like she had left in a rush. She clutched her phone in one hand, her knuckles white, and I could see the trembling in her shoulders. "Baby, what are you doing here this late?" I asked, pulling her quickly inside. The moment the door shut, she collapsed against me, sobbing into my chest. Her small frame shook, as if she'd been holding it in for too long. I held her tight, guiding her to the couch, stroking her hair the way I used to when she was little. For a while, she couldn't even speak, just gasps and tears filling the quiet of the room. Finally, she lifted her head, her eyes searching mine. "Grandma," she said, her voice breaking, "they don't care about you. They don't." I froze, unsure of what to say. "They only care about what you can give them," she continued, words spilling out now in a rush. "I hear them all the time. When the cards stopped working, when you didn't answer their calls, they weren't worried about you. They were worried about themselves, about the house, about money, about Dr. Carvale. They don't care if you're okay. They just care about what you can do for them." Her words cut deep, not because they were new, but because they came from her. I had suspected. I had felt it. I had lived it. But hearing it from the mouth of my granddaughter, the one I thought might still see me through innocent eyes, made it undeniable. Tears stung my own eyes, but I stayed steady for her. "Sabria," I whispered, brushing her hair back, "I know." She shook her head fiercely. "No, Grandma, you don't understand. I told them I wanted to come see you. I told them I was worried about you. And they said," her voice broke again, but she forced the words out, "they said you were fine. They said you were just being dramatic. They told me to stop asking." I felt the room tilt, anger mingling with grief in my chest. To dismiss me was one thing. To twist the truth for her, to poison her view of her own grandmother, was another. I had to sneak out, she confessed, her voice softening. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to see you for myself. I needed to know you were okay. And Grandma, her eyes filled again. "Please don't let them use you anymore. Please. I see it. I see how they treat you. And it's not fair." For the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Hope, sitting there in the dim light of my living room. Holding Sabria close, I realized I wasn't as alone as I thought. The same granddaughter I had rocked to sleep, fed with spoons of applesauce, and walked to kindergarten was now looking at me not as someone who needed me, but as someone who stood with me. Her loyalty breathed new life into me. It wasn't just about taking back what I gave anymore. It was about showing her, and maybe myself, that love doesn't have to come tangled with entitlement, that dignity could still exist in a family where greed had taken root. I hugged her tighter, whispering into her hair, "I hear you, baby, and I promise you, I'm not going to let them use me anymore." In that moment, with Sabria's tears soaking my shirt and her arms wrapped tightly around me, I felt my resolve settle deeper than it ever had before. I wasn't just fighting for myself now. I was standing for the one person who still believed in me, who saw the truth even when it hurt. That night, my living room felt different, less lonely, less cold. With Sabria by my side, I knew the fight ahead wasn't mine alone. The night of the Atlanta Symphony Gala, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. The emerald gown draped over my frame with quiet grace, its color making the silver in my hair shimmer beneath the light. For years, I had dressed with practicality, choosing comfort over beauty, invisibility over presence. But that evening, I felt none of that. I felt seen. I felt whole. Dr. Carvale arrived promptly, as he always did, offering his arm with a smile that carried both warmth and respect. "Ready?" he asked softly. And for the first time in a long time, I was. The Bentley glided through Atlanta streets, carrying me into a world I had always admired from afar, but never been invited into. When we pulled up to the gala, cameras flashed, tuxedos and gowns swept across the entrance, and music spilled from the grand hall. My heart raced, but not from nerves, from anticipation. Tonight wasn't about revenge. Tonight was about presence. Mine. Inside, the hall glittered with chandeliers and murmurs of Atlanta's elite. I stepped carefully beside Carvale, his hand steadying me, and I felt the eyes on us, not in judgment, but in recognition. People greeted him warmly, and when their gazes turned to me, I was introduced not as someone's mother, not as a shadow. I was simply Janora Claiborne, a woman worth knowing in her own right. And then I saw them. Maurik and Taylor stood across the ballroom, their faces almost identical in expression. Shock, disbelief, and a sharp edge of discomfort. Maurik's jaw clenched, his glass of champagne trembling slightly in his hand. Taylor's smile faltered the moment her eyes landed on me, quickly replaced by the kind of tight-lipped expression people wear when their control slips away. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I held my head high and allowed them to feel the weight of the moment. For years, they had dismissed me, treated me as a background player in their story. Now, under the grand chandeliers of the Symphony Hall, they were the ones fading into the backdrop, while I stepped into the light. It didn't take long for Taylor to make her move. I saw it in her stride, the calculated sway of her gown, the forced brightness in her eyes. She walked directly to Dr. Carvale, ignoring me completely, and extended her hand. "Dr. Carvale," she said with a practiced smile, "I've been meaning to connect with you. I've sent several emails about a project I'm leading in pharmaceuticals. I'd love a moment to discuss." He cut her off gently, but firmly. I don't mix business with personal life. His eyes flicked to me, then back to her. "I'm here with Janora, and that is all that matters tonight." The words landed like a stone thrown into glass. Taylor froze, her smile cracking for just a second before she tried to recover. But the damage was done. Around us, people had heard. People had seen. The very connection she had chased, the one she thought could propel her forward, had chosen me instead. Maurik hovered nearby, watching the exchange unfold with helplessness written across his face. He didn't step in. He didn't defend her. He just stood there, silent, his eyes flicking between me and Carvale, as though trying to process how his world had shifted so quickly, so publicly. I didn't need to say anything. My silence was enough. My presence was enough. The woman they had once dismissed as weak and dependent was standing in front of them, radiant, dignified, and valued by someone they could never sway. The music swelled around us, violins filling the air, and I slipped my hand back through Carvale's arm. Together, we moved away from them, leaving their humiliation behind in the middle of that glittering ballroom. For the first time in decades, I wasn't walking behind anyone. I was walking forward in my own name, on my own terms. When Omari spread the stack of papers across my dining room table, I realized how much power ink and signatures truly carried. For years, my life had been dictated by what I gave away: money, time, energy, love. But now, with each page sliding beneath my pen, I was taking it all back. The first document was the sale of the house, the sprawling home that Maurik and Taylor had flaunted as if it were theirs alone was being stripped from their grip. My $85,000 investment had anchored it, and Omari made sure that anchor gave me full leverage. The language was airtight. The property was mine to sell and theirs to vacate. I signed slowly, deliberately, feeling every letter carve a new line of freedom across my heart. Next came the redirection of my estate. For years, I had imagined that whatever I left behind would automatically belong to Maurik. It felt like the natural order of things, even if I knew deep down he hadn't earned it. But Omari drafted it differently. Every dollar I had worked for, every account I had protected, would no longer funnel into his hands. Instead, it would be transferred into a charitable trust bearing my late husband's name. He walked me through each clause. This language, he said, tapping the page, ensures they cannot contest it. No loopholes, no appeals. It is ironclad. I listened carefully, my chest rising with something I hadn't felt in a long time: relief. For decades, I had lived in fear of leaving nothing behind, of my sacrifices vanishing into thin air. But now, I knew that my legacy wouldn't disappear. It would live on, untouched by greed, untarnished by entitlement. Omari's attention to detail was exacting. He highlighted clauses that prevented constructive trust claims, ensured no grounds for undue influence, and shut down every possible avenue Maurik and Taylor could attempt. Each safeguard was a wall, and with every wall erected, I felt safer, stronger, whole. When I finished signing, Omari gathered the papers, slid them neatly into a folder, and looked at me with a small smile. It's done. They can't touch any of it. The weight of those words sank deep into me. For years, Maurik and Taylor had lived as though my sacrifices were a permanent fountain they could drink from. They had treated me as a resource, a lifeline, something guaranteed, and endless. But with a stack of signed papers, I had closed that fountain forever. I imagined their faces when the reality hit, when the notices arrived about the house being sold, when they realized the cards weren't just suspended but gone, when they learned the inheritance they had quietly counted on had evaporated into a trust they would never touch. Their downfall wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was precise, quiet, sealed in ink by the same hand that had once written checks to bail them out. I sat back in my chair after Omari left, staring at the empty table. For years, that table had been where I clipped coupons, counted pennies, and stretched meals to keep my family afloat. Now, it was the place where I had rewritten my legacy. The shift was so complete, it almost felt unreal. I thought back to the woman sitting in the Cleveland hospital bed, alone, trembling with fear, wondering if her life had been wasted. She wouldn't have believed this moment was possible. But here I was, not only alive, but standing taller than I ever had, my life finally secured on my terms. The downfall of Maurik and Taylor wasn't in my words or my anger or my presence. It was in these papers, in the signatures they would never undo. Every page was a declaration. I was no longer theirs to drain, and my legacy would not be theirs to squander. Their downfall was sealed in ink. The unraveling didn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happened in layers, each one peeling back the comfort Maurik and Taylor had wrapped themselves in. The first cracks appeared with the credit cards. I heard later how they embarrassed themselves at a restaurant. The bill dropped on the table while Taylor sat frozen. Her card declined again and again until the waiter returned with eyes full of pity. Maurik scrambled for excuses, fumbling through his wallet, but there was nothing left to cover the cost. For two people who had lived so boldly on the illusion of stability, humiliation was their first taste of reality. Then came the accounts. The quiet cushion they had used for years to cover late mortgage payments, shopping sprees, and vacations was suddenly gone. When they tried to withdraw, the system locked them out. I imagined Taylor's fury boiling over, her nails tapping against the counter while a bank manager explained that access was no longer authorized. She had grown used to calling the shots, but now every door was closed. And then the house. Oh, the house. Their kingdom of glass. The gated community, the sprawling rooms, the lawn they hired someone else to maintain. For years, they treated that home like proof of their success, when in truth, it had been my sacrifice propping it up. When the notice of sale arrived, their panic was no longer private. Neighbors saw the for sale sign planted in the front yard, whispers spreading through the cul-de-sac. The couple who once hosted cocktail parties and posted vacation photos were suddenly stripped bare, exposed for what they had always been, dependent, entitled, hollow. Maurik came to me once more, but this time he didn't arrive with anger. He arrived with something closer to desperation. His eyes carried the weight of a man whose world had collapsed. He pleaded quietly, his voice cracking in a way I hadn't heard since he was a child. "Mom, please. The kids, they're scared. We don't know what to do." I listened, but I didn't bend. For years, I had rescued him from the consequences of his own choices. For years, I had buffered him from the world's sharp edges. This time, I let those edges cut, not out of cruelty, but because it was the only way he would learn. Taylor didn't come with tears. She came with venom, her voice sharp, accusing me of betrayal. "You've ruined us," she spat. "Do you know what people are saying? Do you know what this does to our reputation?" Her words told me everything I needed to know. Even in ruin, she cared more about appearances than about truth, more about perception than survival. She wasn't grieving the loss of family or love. She was grieving the collapse of her own image. As they stumbled, I found myself lighter. For the first time, I didn't feel bound by their chaos. The quiet in my home wasn't emptiness anymore. It was peace. I brewed tea in the evenings without my phone buzzing with requests. I read books without interruption. I slept knowing that my sacrifices were no longer being drained by people who saw them as bottomless. The contrast was sharp. While they scrambled to downsize, to explain to their children why the house was no longer theirs, to piece together a life without the safety net I had provided, I breathed deeper. My stitches had healed, my body still fragile but strong enough to carry me forward. My heart, the one that had nearly given out, beat steady now, filled with a peace I hadn't known in years. Revenge, for me, wasn't fire and fury. It was watching them face the reality I had shielded them from all their lives while I stepped into freedom. Their downfall wasn't just theirs to endure. It was my closure. When Omari returned with the final confirmation, the papers neatly bound and signed by all necessary hands, I sat in silence for a long time. The house was gone. The accounts were secured. The estate redirected into a trust that would carry my husband's name long after I was gone. Every thread Maurik and Taylor once pulled had been cut clean. The trust wasn't just money. It was my way of reclaiming dignity, of rewriting the story of my life. My husband had worked hard, and his name deserved to live on with honor, not be dragged into entitlement and greed. Every dollar I had earned, every sacrifice I had made, would now help children through scholarships fund medical care for those who couldn't afford it, and keep his legacy alive in ways Maurik and Taylor could never touch. When I signed the last page, I felt no bitterness, no rage, just strength. It was the quiet strength of a woman who had been overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed, yet who had outlived every attempt to diminish her. Dr. Carvale sat with me that evening, his presence steady as always. We didn't talk about what had been lost. We talked about what was ahead. He spoke of concerts we could attend, gardens we could visit, places I had never seen because I was always too busy carrying everyone else. His voice carried no urgency, no expectation, just companionship. After years of giving myself away, I realized I still had more life to live, and this time it would be mine. I thought of Sabria, too, her late-night confession, her tears soaking into my shoulder, her plea for me not to let her parents use me anymore. For her, I was determined to model something different, that love wasn't measured in how much you could take from someone, but in how much dignity you allowed them to keep. My trust, my decisions, my newfound independence. All of it would show her that she didn't have to live repeating the same cycles. At 67, I had discovered something most people spend a lifetime searching for: power on my own terms. Power not defined by money in someone else's pocket or recognition in someone else's eyes, but by the ability to decide how my life and legacy would unfold. My revenge wasn't about cruelty. It wasn't about punishing them for their neglect. It was about reclaiming the dignity I had been denied, proving to myself that I was never powerless, even when they made me feel like I was. By closing those doors, by choosing where my life's work would flow, I showed them, and myself, that I had always held the keys. As I stood by the window that night, watching the city lights flicker, I whispered my husband's name softly. His legacy was safe. My dignity was restored, and my future, whatever years I had left, belonged entirely to me. At 67, I was no one's safety net, no one's resource, no one's forgotten backbone. I was Jan Nora Claiborne, and the power had always been mine.